Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming to my presentation. If you hear the radio in the background, that's because we are presenting live from Station 52 today in Olathe, Kansas. But what we're going to talk about is the future of community risk reduction. All right, that's something that we have to deal with in each of our cities, our states, our counties. It impacts everybody. And specifically, we're going to talk about climate, technological advances, and changes in society, and how those are going to influence our community risk reduction and where we place an emphasis on, where we put our dollars, things like that, to really prepare our communities for the future. So, a little bit about me. My name is Captain Christopher Camp. I started in the fire service in 2002 in North Pole, Alaska. I was a student up there, trying to stay out of trouble during the long winters, and found the fire department as something that could really hold my attention and keep me busy. After I moved out of Alaska, I joined the Marine Corps at 19 and went to Afghanistan twice, 2007 to 2011. Then, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was hired at the Olathe Fire Department here in Kansas. So, we are a city of about 150,000 people, 8 stations. We run about 15,000 calls a year. I am the captain of Truck 52, which is the busiest truck company in Johnson County, Kansas. And I am also the captain of Hazmat 52. So we're a dual house, and run both of those disciplines together. I have been in the fire service for 15 years. So since I was about 16 years old, minus a few years here and there for schooling and whatnot. My current specialization is hazardous materials and truck work. As I alluded to in the last slide, we're a truck company and a hazmat unit. I have a bachelor's in organizational leadership through the Mid-American Nazarene University, and I am also a managing officer through the National Fire Academy and an accredited fire officer through SIPSI. Interestingly, those initials are MOFO, so I am a certified MOFO. So I took a look at the roster today before class, and I saw we have a very diverse audience today. And I wanted to make a slide to illustrate how influential our group is here today and how we can push changes to really make a difference rapidly in our communities and on a national scale. So we have some individuals from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and as you know from recent events, some particularly around climate change like wildfire or hurricanes, insurance has actually pulled out of some states and raised premiums for people. And finances is pretty much the number one motivator for for a company, state governments, things like that. So, you know, the insurance commissioners really have the ability to motivate people financially, to make changes that make sense. The National Safety Council, thanks for coming here today. They are influential when it comes to companies, our local companies and organizations, worker safety, and highway safety. The National Fire Protection Association deals with building codes, local and state governments, and domestic industry. So anytime a code goes in to upgrade a building or a renovation occurs, we can make sure that the changes are being made make sense for community risk reduction. Um, and we'll talk more about that later. And the National Fire Academy. So I've personally been to the National Fire Academy 5 times. They reach everyone from firefighters to officers to chief officers all across the nation and actually beyond that. But we'll stick with just America for now. According to NFPA, there are over 1 million people in the fire service, in the American Fire Service, and if the National Fire Academy is able to reach a fraction of them, I think that the changes that we want to make will be much easier done. All right, so to know what we need, what we're up against, we need to do a size up of community risk reduction and really understand where our threats are and to make that assessment of our current situation. So some of the questions we need to ask are some communities particularly vulnerable to fire and disasters? So in Olathe, we have some pretty large swings in socioeconomic groups. We have some very wealthy neighborhoods and we have some pretty poor neighborhoods. And I don't think that anybody who's been on a fire truck wouldn't tell you that rich people stuff doesn't burn. That's kind of a thing that we say here. And that the basis for that is we have almost no fires in our wealthy neighborhoods. Not to say we don't have any, but we have much less. And our lower income neighborhoods, our neighborhoods that are high in immigrant populations, things like that, seem to experience a lot more fire problems, EMS problems, and also those problems seem to have a lot longer lasting impact. Next, we need to talk about climate change. So has climate change had an effect on risk to communities? And I think that we can all agree that it absolutely has. You know, we're looking at sea level rise on the coast. We're seeing more intense wildland fires on the interior. And then right now in the news, California is experiencing its first hurricane in 90 years. And as climate change becomes more of an issue, as it gets worse and worse, these problems they're also going to get worse and worse. And the last thing I want to talk about is technology. So can technology continue to make our community safer? And I say continue because technology's already had a massive impact from where we used to be. We didn't used to have telephones. We didn't have a 911 system. We didn't have weather forecasting. And from where we are now, looking to the future, will new things be developed that will make our lives, our communities, more safe than they currently are? All right, first up, we're going to talk about society changes and the effects of unequal equity. So here's a map I pulled out of the Olathe Fire Department CRESA documents. And basically these are maps illustrating farthest to the left, those are fires from 2017 to 2021. In the middle is a list of EMS calls from just 2021. And then on the far right, we're talking about impoverished neighborhoods. And if you look, you can see a correlation between the centralized location of the fires, the centralized location of EMS calls, and the especially dark areas on the impoverished population map. So there's a clear correlation here, and we need to dig into that a little bit. So unequal equity results in unequal fire and EMS calls. So there was a study done by Fahi and Maheshwari called "The Poverty and Risk of Fire," published by the NFPA, pardon me. And basically it talks about the factors associated with poverty and how those increase your risk of fire or EMS problems, more statistically than other or demographics. So some of the things that they struggle with are family stability, crowdedness, overcrowding in their apartments, in their rooms, in their houses, the percentage of owner-occupied homes, older housing, which is a problem here, portion of vacant housing, and the ability to speak English. So Older housing, I bring that up specifically because, we have some houses in Olathe that are built in the 1800s, and they are in our lower income neighborhoods. They are also more susceptible to fires because they have not been renovated or they have been renovated improperly, which can increase your fire danger. And then, just to circle back to the ability to speak English or the lack thereof, I think that really makes life more difficult in every regard. Even if you wanted to get your house remodeled, you may not be able to clearly convey what you wanted or where a danger lays and how to mitigate that problem. So obviously in a lower income neighborhood, funds are an issue. So, we talk about having enough smoke detectors, having enough fire extinguishers. Home improvements may be delayed. They could be do it yourself or they could be non existent. Anybody who has been a firefighter for 10 minutes has probably been in a house and seen a do it yourself job that probably functions but is incredibly dangerous. Um, and then we talk about substitution of materials and products. So, I think open fires replacing heaters, dressers replacing cribs. In Olathe, we just found plastic piping for a rain spout that was being used as a dryer duct through a house. It was probably something that they had on hand, and it saved them money to use that instead of a proper aluminum one. And also, inflation hits these families disproportionately. So if you're worried about putting food on the table, you're not as much worried about the possibility of a fire maybe happening. Until that fire happens, it's not a reality. It's just a possibility. So, people are obviously going to prioritize things like food and heat and shelter, uh, and not worry so much about what could happen. So I think one thing that we need to take away from this is that our community risk reduction efforts must be disproportionately focused on elderly and low-income neighborhoods. And there need to be additional efforts to bridge cultural and language gaps. Um, so I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do that because I think it's going to be different for every community. But I think that it's important that we definitely try and do that. And if you don't have an idea, we work for an organization full of lots of smart, imaginative people. So crowdsource it and see what your frontline supervisors, see what your firefighters have to say about that. I think that we need to look into innovative approaches. Um, Potentially things like funding repairs of those hazardous living conditions or finding houses to ease the crowded living situations. And things like this can be brought about during home inspections, for instance. Can we make home inspections mandatory when somebody's selling a home? Uh, I think that that's something that's going to be dependent on your city council and your state and things like that. But think about it. If we can make a home inspection mandatory and an inspector can go in there and determine if this is a safe living environment every time a house is sold, what does that do to our community risk profile? I think it lowers it quite a bit. Now, on the other end, there's logistics, there's hiring people, there's salaries that we have to look into. So it might not be viable for every, organization, but it's just one way that we could maybe tackle this. Um, and then, of course, better jobs and education and community are going to reduce those hardships that each person faces. I know that that's not something that each of us can reach out and fix ourselves, but hey, it's good to know. All right, our second topic is going to revolve around climate change, and how we cope with this emerging threat. So, changing weather systems are bringing new hazards to all sorts of different regions. No one has seen a hurricane hit California in 90 years. Um, and I don't think that that's something that they're quite prepared for. They have experienced significant drought lately, and I would expect that they've probably put a lot of their community risk reduction into preventing wildfires or ensuring that the drought doesn't affect food supplies or things like that. And now they have quite the opposite problem. They're about to have a lot of rain in a very short amount of time. And, that's because of climate change. And now they have to pivot, and hopefully, that's something that they can fix before it becomes a real threat to their communities. Areas unaccustomed to fire are in the news daily. Let's think about Maui, for instance, southern Canada. I was just in Baltimore a few months ago, and you could barely see down the street because of the fires in southern Canada. Texas, Alaska, California, every one of them has experienced unusual weather conditions lately. And the number of disasters that have increased, they have increased by a factor of 5 over a 50-year period. So you can really see that not only has climate change been an issue, but it is an accelerating issue. It is getting worse and worse. And, it also comes not only with an impact to human lives, but it also comes with a massive financial impact too, to our organizations, to businesses, to the government, everything like that. So here's a quick slide illustrating billion-dollar disasters in 2022. So during the early 80s, if you go back and you look at the records, there's maybe an average of one or two or a maximum of three disasters a year that would reach this kind of level. And in 2022, there were 18 separate events that were over $1 billion in damages. All right, so what are the solutions to some of these problems? Um, Honestly, it's going to be a little bit of forewarned is foreprepared. Um, so we need to focus on conducting risk analysis for each community and especially our target hazards. In Olathe, for instance, we have what we call the tank farm, holds hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline that is pumped through on a pipeline from Texas to Canada every day. If that, that's something that we need to pay special attention to, how climate is going to affect that. What if it gets hit by a tornado? What if it gets hit by multiple tornadoes? Sea level rise, tornadoes, hurricanes, mudslides, drought. The list is unfortunately endless. But we need to go back to our individual departments and think, what is a threat here? And then kind of curtail what that assessment is going to look like. And we need to be able to project emergencies and how to mitigate them. So one thing I think that we need to do now before these emergencies are truly in full swing for all of us is emphasize applicable training. So, if you live in Florida or you live in a floodplain zone or something like that, maybe you want to put an emphasis now on swift water rescue training. Or if you live on a fault line or something like that in California, maybe you need to look into training your department on structural collapse. I'm not saying take money away from other programs, but maybe you need to add this into it. And if you don't have a swift water problem, maybe you're in the desert and it doesn't rain there at all. And maybe that's not a threat in the future. Maybe search and rescue is a problem for you, or will be. Who knows? It's going to be different for every one of us, but we need to go out and see what our communities are going to need, not now, but in 10 years from now, and to start making that adjustment now. So we also need to talk about building resilient emergency response infrastructure. So we need to look at what are vital things for our infrastructure. We have fire trucks. Do we have backup fire trucks? We have communications. Do we have backups to our communications? And depending on the importance and the severity of the threat in our region, maybe we need to have backups to the backups. And we need to build and lobby for resilient civilian infrastructure. So this really speaks to a lot of people out here in our audience. But if we can update codes in regions to reflect new hazards, like mandate earthquake mitigation technology in buildings where earthquakes could be a potential problem. Or, like I said, it's going to be different for everybody. Think about what's going on in your hometown, and is there a way to legislate uh, some kind of safety device into our communities? We also need to lobby local politicians and push these infrastructure initiatives. And something that I wanted to talk about that spoke to me personally was hardening the target. This was something we talked about in the Marine Corps, and it's the idea is to build your city with safety in mind. So, we talk about building a fire break, and nobody wants to just build a fire break on the edge of their city. But is it possible to build a park on the edge of your city that doubles as a fire break? Or is it possible to talk about using the subway system to create shelters for heat and inclement weather? We need to use existing infrastructure um, to save money, find their dual purpose, and then as we build things in the future, also consider what other things we can use it for. Our last slide is going to be about technological challenges. So when it comes to technology, new technology can be an asset, but it often has several points of failure. Sometimes that is the end user, like one of us. I am pretty the poster child for not using technology very well. In fact, I'll be surprised if I submit this assignment properly. Um, and is your technology cross-compatible with surrounding agencies? Is it rugged enough to survive your mission? And does it tell you what you need to know? So we talk about technology failing. So wildfires in California, let's use that as an example. AT&T, I think this was in 2018, perhaps 2019. AT&T throttled the internet being used by wildland teams down to an almost non-functioning level. We look at the Ukraine conflict. Elon Musk, so Ukraine bought Starlink, and Elon Musk turned it off, which definitely lessened the capabilities of the Ukrainian military. Now, I'm not getting political here, but these are points of failure. Sometimes they're people, sometimes it's an equipment failure, sometimes it's a funding failure. There's lots of different options. Could be batteries, it could be upload and download speeds, it could be that your technology works, but it doesn't talk to anybody else's technology, so it makes it kind of useless. Um, some of these technologies require very specialized training. And are your people qualified to run these very specific technologies? And if not, are they easy to figure out? Are they intuitive? Are they easy to troubleshoot? So things like drones require certificates of authorization and ground school training. Some hazmat sensors, practically, they display information sometimes in an absolutely unreadable language, unless you're a hazmat technician. Does your internet auto connect? Who fixes it if it doesn't? And are these items tested and trained on regularly? Because if they're not, these are all perishable skills. Luckily, there are a lot of solutions with technology. Um, we need to embrace and experiment with new technology to see what works for us. Historically, I think the fire service has a resistance to change, but it should really be the opposite. We should embrace the idea of change and understand that not all the technologies that we try will be winners. Some of these will be losers. They will be a total failure. But for every absolute failure, we might have a small success, or we might have a success that totally turns our community risk reduction on its head and makes it vastly more efficient. Thomas Edison, he had a motto, and there is a way to do it better. Find it. Okay, and we talk about failure. Like Thomas Edison tried to make the light bulb thousands and thousands and thousands of times. He had thousands of prototypes before he actually figured it out. And that's true with the fire service, and it should be kind of our approach to new technologies, understanding some of these are going to be losers, and for every loser, hopefully we have a win in there. All right, getting to the conclusion, the best part of the whole presentation. So let's recap on societal and equity influences. Healthier populations are critical. They take less resources. They require less emergency services. Education and community risk reduction programs need to target uh, poor and elderly demographics with innovative ways to solve new problems. And building trust benefits us as the fire service, it benefits the community, and it really streamlines a lot of communication. Climate change. We are already past the point where climate change has a potential to be an issue. It is an issue now. And we need to focus on things like alerting systems, forecasting systems, and hardening our communities against climate change. We need to look into ways to get the message out that there's a wildfire, or that there's a tornado, or that there's a heat wave coming, and let our communities adjust on a personal level to hopefully withstand those issues. And we need to emphasize training and disciplines that our communities will need in the future. So when you go back home, don't look at what we need right now. Look at what we will need in 10 years. Look at what threats are evolving in our communities and how those are going to impact us. And lastly, technology is key. Uh, we need to change our perception on how these things, we need to not be afraid of failure. And failure is part of the game. Understand that. Let your people know that not everything we try is going to be a win. And make them tell you when something is a loser. But let them know, hey, we're going to try this out. We're going to see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll try something else. Okay. And just go into that with an open mind, understanding that innovation is not an easy process, but it yields big results. Effective community risk reduction is a goal that we all have, and that we all have to accomplish. We all have the tools, we all have the determination, and we all have the people to do it. If we fail at effective community risk reduction, it's not going to be us who pays for it. It's going to be our communities. People will lose their lives. They will lose their property. And there's, not every battle is going to be a win, but I think that we can at least reduce the amount of battles that we have to fight. And we owe that to our communities to do that.